So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and actually the last battle replay that I can do in my current backlog, because the only other replays I have that I haven't already recorded up till now are basically copies of Bersergath and also one on Moria, which I cannot do because Moria does not work on my current system for reasons I'm still not entirely sure of. But yeah, so hopefully I'll get some new material by the next time I go for another recording session, because this is the only one that I can do for the time being, if not, other than the vaunted channel update that I've been saying I'd be doing for the past couple of replays. But this should be a rather familiar looking map, because it's one that we didn't do all that long ago, albeit the context was very different. That one was very much in the vein of a siege battle, whereas attack defence, the orcs waiting in the hills for the forces of good to assail them, and in that case of course the orcs were able to come out on top as the defenders. In this case though, it's a much more even playing field in the sense that we have a 2v2. It's a fairly long battle for a 2v2, but a large part of that I imagine is going to be the armies actually manoeuvring to get into position to actually fight one another. This is a very varied map as well. I feel as though where the battle takes place relative to the two teams is going to be the ultimate deciding factor, more so than anything to do with the strength of the various armies and the skill of the various players that are on offer today. But we have the red team, which are going to be two human kingdoms, and then the blue team, which is a rather bizarre mix of elves and orcs. So certainly not lore friendly from that perspective, nor is there really any sort of theme that we can glean from this. But of course it is the last replay, like I said, that I can actually do for this recording session before the well of content that I have currently available to me runs dry. So let's see who is going to be facing off against who here. We have the Elves of Imladris. I mean, Imladris are a faction that people always request more of, so at least there's that from that perspective from this replay. Played by the Mark of the Knight, who of course sent me the replay on Khan Doom not too long ago, and he's going to be playing as the Elves. So the Elves obviously always going to be all about that quality, so I mean on a map like this there are going to be potentially smaller like choke point battles. The battles are perhaps going to be a little bit more sporadic with individual units. That's where high quality armies can really come into their own, so that is where Imladris can potentially do some heavy damage. The general's going to be in the god Helim Einauer, so this will keep him out of the melee combat for at least the start of the battle. Moving on into later stages, however, when they do have to get into melee, they're still going to be very, very solid, of course. They double as very powerful sword and shield infantry, as well as having those Silverthorn arrows at long range. Certainly among Imladris' archers, you know, they are the most solid at taking enemy arrow fire, and also they're going to be the most damaging, especially with their ability to knock over advancing enemy units. Positioning is going to be everything, but still a very solid unit to put your general in indeed. We've got a unit of Eldarenway archers, which among the standard archers for Imladris are also the strongest, in much the same vein in comparison to other Elven factions with their units. The Eldarenway are better than the standard heavy units from, for example, Lothlorien and Mirkwood. However, you can only bring one of them before the price increases, and they are very expensive, so there is that trade-off. As with most things to do with Imladris, they are very expensive to bring all their best stuff, but if you can do so, then they can be very effective. And then to round out the Imladris archer lineup, we've got a couple of units of Norrotino warriors as well. Main reason why you'd want to bring them over the slightly cheaper archers of Rivendell is the fact that they are going to be slightly more useful in melee, so perhaps that is the thinking of the Mark of the Knight here, trying to bring a little bit more melee power for later on in the battle, and really make sure that even if your archers do get engaged in melee, they're going to be able to fight back reasonably well. Basic human units after all. It's going to be a more difficult challenge for them to take down Norrotino warriors than it would be for unupgraded archers of Rivendell, who aren't really designed for melee combat, even if they can defend themselves decently well. Imladris, however, unlike the other Elven factions, are not too focused on their archers. While they can certainly do well in that particular theatre, they're much more about their heavy infantry, and the Gwaithir Myrdain are the capstone really of their infantry force. A nice unit of armour-piercing shock infantry, very, very damaging. When you're facing off against human kingdoms as well, that armour-piercing is going to be incredibly useful. In fact, against most factions in the game, I would say armour-piercing is something that you're going to want to bring, and that's something that Imladris certainly can with this unit. I would be very surprised if there was a unit which, stats-wise, would be better than them on the field today. Even if Angmar have brought their Witchround Hammerguard, relatively speaking, the Gwaith are going to be a little bit better in that regard. Got some Eldarenway Swordmasters as well, another unit of shock infantry. They're not multiple HP, however, but they kind of have the stats of a multiple HP unit. You know, they just don't have that second hit point. They're very expensive, like I said, with the Eldraenway Archers. The same thing applies with the Swordmasters relative to other heavy Elven swordsmen. You do pay for them, but on a map like this, if you can get them in the right position, they're going to do very, very nicely indeed, and the humans will really not like facing off against them. Gwythe the Arthand, a very different kind of unit in the sense that they are very much a defensive force, one of the tankiest units of bodyguard spears that the game has to offer. They're very difficult to wear down, and that will be what makes up the initial Imladris line, I'm sure, with them at the core. And they're also going to be flanked by 2 units of Eldraenway Spearmen. This is very often the unit of Eldraenway you'll see Imladris invest a little bit more in, because it allows you to form up a very, very solid front line indeed. Obviously anti-cavalry as well, which could come into play. There are some more open areas of this battlefield. We'll have to wait and see if they decide to fight on the low ground plains or in the hills. Irregardless, the spears are still going to be useful in some capacity, no matter what. Fully upgraded Imladris Guardians as well, so you can definitely see the quality-centric view that the Mark of the Knight has gone for here. Imladris Guardians with the armour upgrade, after all, are one of, if not the highest quality, massable unit of line infantry that the game has to offer. As with anything in Imladris, you pay a heavy price for that, but worth every penny if you can set them up correctly. Then over here we have some Broinen River Wards. They aren't as impressive as the Eldraenway Swordmasters by any means, but you can bring more than one. They're a little bit more reasonable in terms of their price, and they're still going to certainly do the business against the equivalent human units. 2 units of Imladris Sentries, so again there's really nothing with regards to basic units. The most basic unit we've seen on display are the Noratuno Warriors from Imladris. 2 units of sentries means if they can set themselves up, this is exactly the kind of army where if you set them up in a relatively narrow choke with supporting archers, all the damage, all the defensive infantry you have as well, it's going to be nigh on impossible to break them down. So the red team have got every motivation really to stop Imladris from setting themselves up, especially with the potential aggression that Angmar can offer them as well. This is going to be interesting to see how the red team approach things. And then we also have some Riders of the Broinen over here offering a little bit more in the way of mobility, because this is a rather static army. You want to be setting up your pikes, your defensive infantry and your archers in a position, whereas if you want a little bit more mobility, then the Riders of the Broinen will offer that with their horse archers. Now then, moving on to the Mark of the Knight's ally, who is right next to him, we have Wojciech, who's playing as Angmar. Angmar, certainly another heavy infantry faction, albeit they achieve things in a pretty different way. They're very centralised around their armour. More numbers focused as well, although it does look as though Angmar have gone very heavily in for the quality as well. It's a relatively small combined force by the looks of things. We'll see if we can pick out any hidden units as well. Upgraded Guardians of Khan Doom are not quite as impressive as the upgraded Imladris Guardians, but they're still a very, very solid unit. They don't have the same sort of damage really that the elves can chuck out, but big shields are very, very difficult to slow down. Obviously Angmar, they're a simultaneously aggressive defensive faction. They are aggressive and then they maintain their aggression with their high defensive values. I don't know how aggressive they're going to be if the elves want to post up in a location and try and hold it, but we shall see. Gundabad Guard, once again, nowhere near as impressive as the Eldraenway Spearmen they're fighting alongside, but in typical Orc fashion they're going to be cheaper, they're going to be more numerous, and they can still be fairly aggressive as well with how solid they can be. There are hidden units in and amongst them as well, Orc Fellas, so a bit more armour piercing, which is always going to be useful against human kingdoms. There are pretty few human kingdoms, especially from the west, that don't rely on their armour in some capacity, and Rohan are not on the field today. Trolls of Gundabad and Angmar, they very often get brought together because it means that you essentially have one big cluster of trolls which can be committed for a huge damage spike at some points in the battle. There are more hidden units around here. There's Witchround Pikemen, so again plenty of pikes on display for the blue team here. The armour upgrade makes them just that little bit more solid as well. In behind we have some Witchround Scourge Raiders. Throwing axes are always pretty devastating, especially against the right target. They've got the armour upgrade as well, but even with this they are still somewhat vulnerable to enemy long-range missiles like archers, so they do have to be on the lookout for that. Blackwatch Legion are a very good aggressive unit. Again, like I said, Angmar are aggressive by using defensively minded units, and the Blackwatch Legion are perhaps the ultimate expression of that, with a huge shield and armour value, but most people know them for bulldozing their way through enemy lines with their superior mass, and also their actual attacking values are not all that impressive for the price of this particular unit. Like with every Great Shield unit in the game, being 2 of them, if you push too deeply into the enemy lines then you're going to end up getting your unit killed pretty quickly. Bodyguard units, the Witchround Blackguard being the shielded one, the Hammer Guard, as we mentioned previously, being the armour-piercing shock infantry. And finally we do have the Witchers. I mean, in terrain such as this, if they can get themselves in a good position, on the path up to the mountains or in the mountains somewhere. We actually saw on the last battle on this map when Angmar were on the defence, the Witches were absolutely devastating. But we have also seen somewhat recently in my hands, of all things, the Witches actually be completely ineffective, so we shall wait and see. The red team are split off by this mountain range as well, so that is something else that they have to bear in mind. We have Farkin, who's playing as Dol Amroth, so you can see a fairly big army this. I would imagine the red team are going to be a bit more numbers heavy than a very quality focused Angmar, and of course just Imladris in general. We have some Black Swan Renegades, armour piercing, going to be useful against both of their foes, certainly more so against Angmar though, because unlike Imladris they do not have the melee defence to back their armour values up, so those maces will certainly be very effective there, as will the Athalon Halberdiers. They do need to be careful about the high number of pikes from the blue team, but if they're facing off against anything else, the Halberdiers could actually be one of the saving graces of the red team's efforts here. They have some pikes of their own as well, a couple of units of upgraded Doran and pikemen. They're not as good, certainly, as the Imladris sentries, nor are they as good actually as the upgraded Witch Realm pikemen. But they do still need to at least contest the pike game, otherwise they're going to get bullied in melee more so than they otherwise would be. Some upgraded Athalon men-at-arms as well, just for the numbers. Again, comparatively speaking against the blue team's line infantry, they're not going to be quite as good, but again, they're here in fairly high numbers, which Dol Amroth will need to rely upon a little bit here. Javelins are going to be another important tool, 2 units of Belfast Marines. Positioning, once again, going to be absolutely everything here. If they can pound the enemy front lines with those javelins, as basic as they may be, it's still going to be the sort of thing which can make a big difference. In terms of long-range skirmishing, the red team really should hold an advantage here, given that the other faction of Dale and Dol Amroth have brought a couple of units of Tirithea marksmen as well, so in spite of the archers that Imladris have brought, like I said, they're not really an archer-centric faction. Angmar are literally the worst archer faction in the game, so this is an area where the red team really do need to stamp their authority. This is the kind of unit which can help them do that. And then we have some high-tier units as well. We've got 2 units of the Dismounted Knights of Silver Swan, multiple HP. They're going to be the sort of thing which help tie the front lines together. The Mighty Haven Guard as well, the sort of thing which there actually isn't an equivalent of in Imladris or Angmar, a unit of really strong heavy swordsmen. We'll see how well they can be used. Rangers are another interesting thing. They're something which neither of the 2 blue team factions have, but both of the 2 red team factions do, so they're going to need to hope that their Wanderers in Nimrodel and presumably the Athala Rangers from Dale are able to do the business as well. Those body-piercing projectiles could be vital. And then some upgraded Doran archers as well, so yeah, certainly in terms of archery prowess, that's what I think Dol Amroth have in spades over the blue team over here. And given that this is Dale, you would imagine that the same sort of thing is going to be happening here with DF Mark's army. He's got some Dalian Spearmen, decent for holding the line. I mean, over here is where this map's frame rate drops very, very sharply. Lake Town Infantry, 2 units of Barding Herd, so yeah, once again, Barding Herd going to be very, very useful, even more so actually than the Athalon Halberdiers, because they're a little bit tankier if they do get exposed a little bit. But yeah, that armor-piercing polearm going to be useful. We also have more Barding Herd, more Lake Town Infantry. Lake Town Pikemen are the weakest unit of pikes on the field, but like I said, it's better to be able to at least contest that fight than just completely surrender the initiative to the blue team in terms of pikemen. Unupgraded Bardian Marksmen, but that's still going to be more than sufficient to really help out with that skirmishing. Some Dalian Spearmen over here as well. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers are another interesting thing, a really good bodyguard hunting unit. There's plenty of units actually which would be a really good target for the Blackshots to go after in this situation. And unlike Dol Amroth, who may find themselves closed down by the blue team pretty quickly, there's nothing to stop Dale digging themselves into the mountains, because the blue team can't really get up here in time to stop them from moving into the hills and getting into a good position. So stuff like the Blackshots should be able to take their pick in terms of their targets. Lots of archers, lots of spears, plenty of good defensive infantry, including the Dalian Royal Guard in there as well, and another unit of armour-piercing bodyguard shock infantry in the shape of the Dalian Paladins, very chunky with their armour, of course. Still would say the Brightly Mirrodane are better, but still, it's another interesting unit. No Earls, which is interesting to see, but they don't necessarily need them. The infantry for the red team is always just going to be a blocking method, and they're going to have to hope that their archers can pick out the right targets. But irregardless of that, I will of course be making a bit of a cut here, because it's going to take a little while for both armies to get in position, so I will rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. Who knows on what part of the map that will be. I have to say, positionally, this isn't exactly what I was expecting from the start of this battle. The blue team have not managed to close in to the red team quickly enough to prevent them from getting into a pretty decent little position to try and defend against the onslaught. But this is also a good thing from the red team's perspective, because really if it came down to a straight up fight in terms of strength in melee, then they wouldn't stand too much of a chance. They're going to need to try and make the most of the positions that they've made for themselves here. It is also interesting to me, actually, that both Imladris and Angmar have decided to attack down different routes. You can see here the Riders of the Broinen getting pretty close to this front line of Dol Amroth over here to do a little bit of initial damage, but the defending archers should be enough to chase them off fairly quickly. And also Dol Amroth is doing the correct thing here by shielding their more vulnerable polearm units with their line infantry. But they're attacking through two different routes, so that will split the attentions of both the blue team and the red team. But of course Imladris also have to split their attention between two different paths as well to try and get the most out of attacking Dol Amroth. So this is going to be interesting. I'm honestly not sure who this will favour more. I think from the initially at the very least it should favour the blue team, because the initial quality should be pretty significant, especially if you're breaking the defending forces as they are now up a little bit more. This is a little bit unfortunate for Mark of the Knight though, losing a few of his Gwaith Myrdain to an initial blow from the Belfalas Marines, and certainly it's not going to be worth their while to have taken those casualties. Fortunately though, the Gwaith Myrdain, well, I mean the Halberdiers are now going to push forward and assist the armour-piercing Black Swan Renegades, and together they should be enough to give the Gwaith Myrdain pause. But you can see here all of the most elite units from Imladris concentrated in one position and being used very, very quickly. The Javelins being utilised, one of the God Helene falls as well, so far the Belfast Marines filling their boots in terms of high-ticket kills, but with both of these two high-tier infantry units, I don't know if even having the polearms is going to be enough to hold them at bay for too long. And even then there's plenty more elite units where that came from. Some of the more basic, if you can call any of Imladris' units on this particular battle basic. Moving forwards as well, still doing a little bit of damage. Meanwhile Dale, you can see here that Guardians of Kharn Goblins moving forward. I mean, from an Angmar perspective, they should be very well suited for taking especially more basic arrows like this. I mean, Lake Town Infantry, it's all well and good to have all of this ammunition being ducked down range. Going after Gundabad Guard now by the looks of things. Maybe Barrow Wights as well, who have revealed themselves. But yeah, I mean, Angmar should be pretty comfortable here. Not only are they pretty bulky in terms of their armour and shield values with a lot of their units, but they're also going to be a little bit more numerous than the Elven forces on the other side, so they're going to be a little bit less concerned with taking this damage, which is probably a good thing, because Dale have got all of the room and all of the elevation they need to basically pick and choose their targets should the need arise. Angmar did bring an archer in the end, but it's a very, very basic unit of archers, so I don't know how much damage this is necessarily going to do. They are going after the units they can actually get some damage done to, though, in the Lake Town Pikemen, so that is a good bit of foresight there from Wojciech. Well, not a huge amount of movement over here still. I mean, they're still trying to just slowly whittle down the front of this force with their archers and their horse archers. Meanwhile, over here, more reinforcements are needed on this front line for Dol Amroth. I mean, we'd have mentioned this, the Athalon Halberdiers, pound for pound, could actually be a fairly efficient unit to use in this sort of situation. They need backup, and unfortunately the initial shielding unit in the Black Swan Renegades they have here have been pretty swiftly dealt with by the best and the brightest that Imladris have to offer. But seeing that this is pretty much the cream of the Elven crop, it does actually make sense to commit the Haven Guard. They are the Dol Amroth unit after all, which wouldn't be out of place in an Elven faction, both in terms of style and effectiveness at the high end. Another unit of Halberdiers, and I mean, this is the thing, Dol Amroth could continue to send units into this little gap and continue to try and wear the Elven assault down. There's Silverthorns coming in, there's 2 units of Belfalas Marines. I think they will probably be going after, yeah, they will be going after the God Helene. Not too surprising that, because you're not really going to get the right angle to shoot into the elite infantry that's on the front line. This could be a bit of a problem though for Dol Amroth. They don't have their pikes nearby, and the Imladris sentries moving in means those halberds are all of a sudden going to be far less effective. But that was a pretty good volley there from the javelins. Very good volley in fact, several of them falling away. They need to get into the front line pretty quickly. I mean, I agree with the idea of trying to get them into the fray to really shore up your front line, but they just got savaged by 2 units of javelins there, which will give Dol Amroth all the encouragement they need to maybe bring their own unit of pikes down here and block off this route from the elves pretty much indefinitely for the time being. plenty more elves down here. Meanwhile, Noratino warriors not having the best time of it. I mean, this is worth bearing in mind as well. As much as they are pretty decent in melee, they are not as bulky as the kind of archers that other factions can make up their main skirmish line with. Especially with the elevation being what it is, this is always going to be a bit difficult for Imladris to do. It's why going for this longer skirmishy sort of approach may not actually be the right thing to do. As risky as it may be, I think you may need to just go all in. Angmar will need to do the same thing eventually. Orc fellas have revealed themselves. They're actually the kind of unit that maybe the late town infantry should be going after. Goblin trackers doing their best as well. I mean, late town infantry are among the more vulnerable units actually that Dale have fielded. They may be, you know, it's pretty much exactly what they're designed to do, take arrow fire, but you know, padded gambeson and shield on the back is not going to be as bulky as a lot of the other Dalian units, so I guess you may as well go after them, and they are one of the units you'll have to deal with in melee anyway, by design. Barrow Wights are going to be an interesting one as well. I'm actually a little bit surprised that Angmar are not being a little bit more aggressive than they're currently being, mainly because it's one of those situations where you're never going to convince Dale to use up all of their ammunition on your basic units. Like, you're going to get hit where it hurts by the Dalian archers. All you're doing really is delaying the inevitable. And also, the longer you leave it, the more that your elven ally may end up struggling. Belfast Marine's now out of ammunition, so being committed forward to add more numbers to the front line. Will that be enough to secure Dol Amroth a victory on this front line? I don't know. I don't think so, actually. A lot of these halberdiers starting to be worn down. The Haven Guard a little bit disparate on this front line also. However, another unit of Athalon halberdiers may be enough to give them a win temporarily. Belpelline moving forwards. There's plenty of reinforcements. The elves, if they really wanted to, could get through here any moment now. Noratino warriors continuing to fire. What are they firing at? Are they trying to... I mean, they're still trying to whittle down this front line, but this is again where Dol Amroth's positioning isn't going to be paying dividends, because those fully upgraded Athalon men-at-arms are going to be serving their purpose very well. They've got a decent shield value, and with that armour upgrade as well, any arrows that do get through that shield are going to be just fine. Meanwhile, Dornonal archers up here, far out of range of the elves due to the elevation, and the more volleys that the Noratino warriors take, the more their DPS is going to tumble. So far so good then for Dol Amroth. Their lines are holding. They haven't used stuff like the Wanderers of Nimrodel just yet. They've got other archers as well. I mean, one problem they may run into is they may start to run low on infantry manpower, because they have already committed quite a few units to this front line. This should be ticking over to saying that they are going to be victorious fairly soon. But it has cost them. It's cost the elves as well, but it's almost impossible to tell who's getting the better end of this deal until later on in the battle. Godhalim stand ready. Runaway archers are leaving. Are they going to try and go and help Angmar? Yeah, Angmar are now moving forward. Guardians of Kharndoom look like they're taking a bit of a savaging from some sort of ranged unit, I assume. Yeah, I mean, you can see here that the problem here is the Guardians of Kharndoom very well armoured still, but their shields are pointing the wrong way. So as the Dalian spears hold them at bay, that's going to be good enough for now. Gundabad Guard will help shore things up, but Dale will be pretty happy with how things have gone so far. Goblin Tracker's out of ammunition, so charging into melee. That was the green light for Wojciech to begin his melee assault, I guess, trying to do what damage he could with his basic archers first. Barrow Wights, of course, doesn't really matter where you hit them from, they're always going to be a tar pit, both for ranged units and for melee units. Slowly but surely they'll wear down the Dalian Spearmen, but slowly but surely it may not be good enough for Angmar. They may need a little bit more punch, and that's exactly why I'd assume the Trolls of Angmar are moving forward. There's not a huge amount of really damaging melee units that Dale have brought. The Dalian Paladin's really the exception to the rule there. From a certain perspective, the Barding Herd as well, but a lot of their infantry here is going to be pretty poor for taking on Trolls. So a lot of these spears, a lot of the basic late town units are going to die in droves, and then maybe with another wave after the Trolls have spent themselves. That could be the answer. Which one? Blackguard are moving forward. Pikes for later on. So this could end up working out quite nicely for Angmar, we shall see. Further back, a few of the Guardians getting in behind enemy lines, but immediately being overrun by a bunch more Dalian units. There's a Dol Amroth infantry unit over here as well, just in case they are needed. Speaking of, let's see how things are going over here. Another round of reinforcements from both sides, actually. Dismounted Knights to Silver Swan for Dol Amroth, and Elder Enway for the Elves, and those Elder Enway proving to be enough to once again give the Elves the initiative in this little conflict. There's still 21 Gwaithly Myrdain, which considering they were committed very early, is a sign that they are also pretty resilient. Gwaithly Arthand as well. Those 2 hit points really paying dividends there. Clear projectiles coming in now though from the Wanderers of Nimrodon. They're having to bend their shots a little bit, so it's not devastating, but it will still convince the Elves maybe that they need to show a little bit more haste than they currently have done. A little bit of friendly fire as well coming in, which will be really bad news for Dol Amroth. This front line continues to be here. I mean, yeah, Barding Herd on the way forward. Another unit of Halberdiers, this time from Dale. They are a little bit more solid than the Dol Amroth offering, like I said, but Elder Enway Spearmen actually getting back off the front line, which is a little bit bizarre. They need to stop using those rangers. They're doing more damage themselves, I think, than the enemy, which is never a good sign. Which Scourge Raiders are in position. They're taking damage from something. There's plenty of archers that Dale have on hand to be used. This front line is looking a little bit flimsy now from Dale. They're sending in some Barding Herd to try and shore things up, but a combination of Trolls and Blackguard over on this side of the line, and the only thing really holding them back is the Dalian Spearmen, so I'm not sure this is going to end too well for them. Elsewhere, Guardian Marksmen continue to fire. Orc making their way up the hill as well. I mean, they're much more vulnerable than most of the other Angmar units, but a little bit of armour piercing will not go amiss against the Dalian front line. Yeah, the Lake Town Infantry, unsurprisingly, a very flimsy front line, mentally and physically, but it is their mental attributes which have failed them this time. Dalian Spearmen now being engaged. They are in loose formation though, so they need to probably bunch up a little bit more. They need some support as well. The spears are good as a basis for a front line, but they can't be the be-all and end-all because they simply won't do enough damage against a force that is as resilient as Angmar is. The saving grace for Dale, like it always was going to be, could potentially be their archers. Those Bardian Marksmen have got pretty much the perfect shot right down the line. A little bit surprised to not see the Athala Rangers up here, to be honest with you, but from an infantry perspective, Dale may be outgunned, but this is exactly how they're going to have to do the business. Looks like they just ran out of ammunition, but the Bardian Marksmen, decent makeshift infantry as well, so they will at least be able to make something happen. Meanwhile, it looks like Imladris are going to be pressurising this route up the hill now as well. The unit of Imladris sentries moving in, which is probably for the best because so far this Dol Amroth front line is holding on just fine because of the sheer amount of Doranano pikemen that this defensive position is made up of. Victory is a distinct possibility. Isn't that something? Further down the hill, Elder Enway archers, riders of the Bruinen. Dalian spears as well. Dornano archers making their way down. Looks like they might be out of ammunition. I mean, with the armour upgrade, they can be a decent meat shield, I suppose, but I'm not sure whether they're going to have the right qualities, and also these pikes seem to be pushing forwards a little bit too much. They could end up having their formation buckled as a result by the high quality elven units. We shall have to wait and see on that front. Meanwhile, the other unit of Doranano archers that's out of ammunition has been committed over here to try and slow the elven advance, but there's something of an inevitability about this at this point. The fact that they keep sending more and more units in, and yet the quality of the attacking forces on both sides seems to be really turning up the heat on the de facto defenders at this point. Further afield, even stuff like the Dismounted Knights of Silver Swan is shaken. There's only 8 Haven Guard remaining, and more Bruin and River Wards adding themselves to the front line. The God Helim in position, firing their arrows right up into the air though, so how effective that's going to be, probably pretty limited. Barding Herd on the way over. Lake Town Infantry, a bit of cavalry action going on, and it is the riders of the Bruinen from the Elves, but getting caught up a little bit on Bardian Marksmen and Dalian Spearmen. See there, the Witcher and Blackguard are still here, but they're being overrun in terms of numbers, so you can see that the Angmar on the front line are looking much more thin on the ground, and a large part of that will be due to the ammunition that's been dumped into them. The Athala Rangers are there now. I mean, they really are focusing on Angmar. I think they've come to the realisation that if they can focus on Angmar, they can then try and double team Imladris later, which is probably the right way to do things, because Dol Amroth has been sort of struggling to maintain their ground against Imladris' quality in the positions they're having to try and hold. Angmar, on the other hand, are pretty much set up to be knocked down at this point. Pikemen have not yet been committed down there. There's another unit of them over here, mind you. Riders of the Broinen are not going to be enjoying their time here, with Dalian Paladins and Royal Guard now slamming the door shut in their face. And with such high quality units, the Dalian Paladins will be pretty well suited for taking down the Witch Realm Blackguard. Another troll. Still alive, so I mean that's something. The trolls I would have expected to have been brought down, but they're not completely out of the fight yet. They still have another unit of trolls somewhere, don't they? Yes, they do. They're on the way up now. And still the issue exists of most of this front line being made up of lower damage units. If you can avoid the Dalian Paladins, then you avoid pretty much the only unit which can decently hard counter the trolls, routing Gundabad Guard. Guardian Marksmen chasing them, but abandoning their position on the front line as a result, and now the Trolls and the Blackwatch Legion can take advantage of that by finishing them off. Though they are just going to continue to roll on through, which may be enough to rout the Guardian Marksmen in the end, actually. One quick look back over here to see how this fight is progressing. What is Dol Amroth doing? Looking like a lot of routing going on here, and I mean Dol Amroth, as a result of siphoning off some of their resources to try and help out against Angmar, this does, of course, give the initiative to Imladris, which can only be a good thing for the elves. Can they arrive in time to save their Angmarim ally? Still, this little strong defensive position over here is still holding because of, well, actually because of Dale's reinforcements mainly, the Barding Herd doing their job, but surely the elves are going to surround them and deal with this particular problem. Further afield, pretty chaotic in behind both front lines at this point, units running around all over the place. Now then, whatever happened to the Blackwatch Legion? Have they been killed en masse? Blackshot Dragon Slayers moving into position, Dalian Royal Guard, who have got the black projectiles, but I do not believe they're actually armour piercing or poison. I think that's more of a bug than anything else. Blackshot Dragon Slayers the only ones that have armour piercing projectiles in the Dalian roster. So what are they going to go after? If the Hammer Guard are in close proximity, then they should be going after them, really. Plenty of, I mean, Guardians of Karndu not going to do too well against Dalian Paladins, you'd have to say. Lots of routing units. Trolls of Gundabad fighting on the front. Here are the Blackwatch Legion, actually managing to force their way through this front line over here, so Angmar actually turning this fight in their favour by going after the weak points of the front line, and now they'll be able to collapse down on the elite units, and this is bad news, I think, for the red team. They needed to be more dominant in their victory over Angmar based on the decisions they've made to then go and face Imladris. If they can't even beat Angmar at all, then they aren't going to stand a chance going into the final phases of this battle. And there are the Hammer Guard moving up now, and the final Witch Realm Pikemen, so the last of Angmar's manpower is now being sent forward to try and help seal the deal. Guardian Marksmen getting surrounded now, Blackwatch Legion doing their thing and pushing through the front line. Not too surprising on this occasion, seeing as how this battle has gone on. Dale have certainly got more and more thinly spread. Now just being used as a basic infantry unit. Not what they're best at, as I've said before, but at this point everyone needs to do their bit. Meanwhile, a bit further back, Dol Amroth coming back over here, but it's a little late for this now, I would have thought. There's some Tirathea marksmen that are trying to hold the line. The Elven cavalry is getting stopped. Getting shot directly in the back now by the Elder Renway archers, which will almost certainly have the desired effect. I mean, you can see here that it's almost like a desperate stand in the way of the arrows so the Barding Herd don't die for the Doranano archers, which is fair enough, but the casualties being inflicted here are still going to be too great in number. Still the God Helene back there as well, which can be committed to melee if they are needed. The elves, I mean, it's cost them a lot, the elves, but they are ultimately going to be victorious, and there's nothing really the red team can be doing about that over here. That front line completely dealt with. Naruto warriors moving forward. Elves Runaway Spearmen in and amongst all of the Guardians and Sentries. Moving forward. Well, Tirithea Marksmen, they're going to be good in melee in the sense that they're, you know, reasonably resilient, but there's no way they're going to be able to do the kind of damage to the Elves which the red team would need to turn this fight in their favour. Wanderers of Nimrodel trying to push their way forwards a little bit more, perhaps. Further back, let's see, Witchram Hammerguard. I'm not entirely certain what the Dalian Paladins are doing down here, maybe trying to stop the Witchram Scourge Raiders from firing, but as a result they're now engaged in a duel against a very similar kind of unit, only the Hammerguard are much fresher than the Dalian Paladins at this point, so it's going to end pretty poorly for the best that Dale has to offer from an infantry standpoint. That is the Angmar General there, and I mean Pikes are also going to come in to give them a hand. Dalian Royal Guard moving in, trying to help turn the tide in melee over here. There's still so many Barrow-wights though. I mean, Barrow-wights are such an awkward unit to try and deal with when you're facing off against Angmar, because they just do not die. They do their damage very slowly as well, but it's a real conundrum to try and bring them down. There goes the Dalian General in that little general duel which is happening over there. Meanwhile, the Trolls have forced their way through to stop the Black Shots from shooting temporarily. The Black Shots will kill the Trolls, but the time that that's buying them will also be pretty important. More units routing all over the place. Again, sheer martial might, I think, is going to be the name of the game for this battle. Not able to keep pace as well as they would have liked, perhaps, with the de facto defenders today. And the Elves slowly but surely grinding their way through that front line. Meanwhile now, just in time to see this force completely destroyed. Still Gwaith Myrdain left, only 5 of them, 10 Gwaith Arthan, but they've been in there since the very start. It goes to show how resilient the really high tier Elven units can truly be. And that of course means more reinforcements are going to be over here, which, I mean, they could, for once, the Elves may actually engage in mass pushing to more rapidly deal with the faltering ranks of Dol Amroth. What's going on over here? Guardians of Khardoom, 6 of them on the way over. Witchram Scourge Raiders, so Angmar are actually going to come to the Elves' aid against those Tirithea Marksmen. I don't know whether they, I mean, they don't need help, of course, but for expedience's sake, Dalian Royal Guard, I mean, the 2 high-tier Dalian archers are going to be the ones that will be the last stand for the human kingdoms here. What's going on over here? Hammerguard have made their way forward now. There's actually still 1 troll left alive. I mean, 38 Hammerguard, 43 Black Shots. I mean, the Hammerguard you would think would actually win this fight because they are dedicated. The numbers advantage that the Black Shots have is not all that significant. It may be, though, that the Hammerguard took more damage at the hands of the Paladins than the Black Shots did at the hands of the Trolls. So there is that. So it's kind of a moot point at this point because they are, of course, going to win regardless. The Dalian Paladins still alive, actually, after the Hammerguard left them. I don't know whether these Scourge Raiders are actually going to be enough to finish them off. Imrahil, captured apparently by the Elves in the Wanderers of Nimrodel unit, of course, and that's going to be that for them. And yeah, it's been as the battle has gone on, it's become more and more dominant for the blue team. And Dale and Dol Amroth maybe on this occasion, strengths very similar, whereas Angmar and Imladris, different strengths, that diversity definitely helping them on this occasion, you would say. God Helene positioning themselves just so. I think they may... Do they have ammunition? Some of them have got their bows drawn, some of them sword and shield. How peculiar. At this point it's just a case of how quick do the blue team wish to be. Dalian Royal Guard not being... Ah, yes, they do have some ammunition. What are they going after? Ah, I see. Trying to pad your kill count. I see you. rather than trying to end the battle quickly, wanting to get a few extra kills to make yourself look a little bit more impressive, perhaps. The classic. There go the Daily Royal Guard. Impressive longevity from the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, but then, yeah, look at this, also going after them with the cavalry as well. Very sneaky. Sneaky, sneaky. I mean, you already will have a fair amount of kills in this battle from going after a more mid-tier focused Dol Amroth, so there's no need to get the extra 100 to 150 kills that you're probably going to acquire from these sorts of shenanigans. Especially when you're allowing Angmar to basically do the heavy lifting here. Blackshots actually did do a real number on those hammer guards. So yeah, the damage inflicted by the Dalian Paladins must have been far more substantial, even though both units were bloodied. Angmar in general paying the ultimate price as well. Some more Elder Enway coming in, so the Elves not completely leaving Angmar to their own devices. This is going to be the end. Fairly dominant victory in the end too. Blackshots, are they going to admit defeat? I think they're not rout, I suppose. Yeah, they're wavering, so they're probably going to end up routing. There they go. Blackshot's not a locked morale unit after all, so yeah. In the end, just too much upfront power from both Imladris and Angmar for these kinds of armies to withstand. Lots of damage done by the archers, you would have to say, especially from the Dalian perspective against Angmar. But yeah, it is what it is. I think, you know, composition-wise, certainly the blue team picked a little bit more wisely for the situation than I think the red team did. So yeah, it was always going to be fairly difficult for them. They actually dug into a defensive position quite nicely, but maybe there would have been better positions to take up rather than splitting their focus as they did here, which ended up being largely down 3 paths. They could have gone back here maybe into the interior of the mountains a little bit more and tried to focus around some better defensive positions than they ultimately ended up doing. You know, it's almost like they were going through the motions a little bit, going, well, this is where, you know, most people hold their ground on this map, so this is where we shall go. Not really considering that maybe there were other positions they could have taken up which would have been even better. But it is what it is in the end. You know, the simple martial might of the blue team was enough. Let's see what did the damage for Imladris. More people wanting to see Imladris a little bit more often, so I think the last few battles have certainly achieved that, and on this occasion we got to see them not at their best, I would say, because you know, you want a bigger battle for that really, but you got to see them doing their thing, certainly. God Helene struggled a little bit perhaps in the face of those javelins. Elder Enway archers doing quite nicely. Gwaithie Myrdain, in spite of the initial javelin volleys they took, doing very well alongside the Gwaithie Arth, and obviously in melee for a long time, smashing their way through both Dol Amroth and Dalian infantry units actually. Several units breaking 100 as well. Elder Enway, Imladris Guardians, very high tier army this though from the Elves, so you'd expect them to do quite well against the equivalent human units that they were facing off against. Nothing really too surprising about that. As far as Wojciech goes, I would imagine that the decent amount of kills on the trolls, I would have assumed, and also a decent amount of kills on their high tier units. Scourge Raiders maybe in there as well. Basic infantry though, I would imagine not quite as impressive because they were getting a real pounding from the archer companies that were on the hills, and of course that's where both, I would say, the red team armies will have got the lion's share of their kills from. Obviously not many kills for Dol Amroth because they were going up against a quality-centric elven army, so it was never going to be that way. It was never going to be a huge kill count for them. But even so, I would imagine that stuff like Doranano archers, Bardian marksmen, Athala rangers, especially for Dale, will probably be where they managed to pick up most of their kills. All of them DF as well, look at that. So yeah, big thank you to the Mark of the Night for sending this battle replay in, and big thank you to all the players for being a part of it. Like I said, at this point my backlog has completely run dry, so hopefully by the next time I go for a recording session I've got some more stuff to work with. And of course, like I've mentioned in the last few battle replays essentially, there will soon be a channel update, which I'll be talking about a few things in, both stuff that is going on just in my life which may affect the channel, but also stuff that isn't necessarily relating to me, which is also just a few observations that I've made, which are also going to be something which may affect the channel moving forward. It's just one of those things that it'll make more sense in the channel update, but essentially there are two things. There's sort of me and what's going on with me, and also the mod, you know, Reforged as a whole, and some of the observations that I've been making, and how the channel may have to change a little bit, regardless of what happens later on in the year. But yes, we shall see. Irregardless of that, that will be happening at some point in April, which this replay is going to be coming out in April. So pretty soon after this one, either the next upload slot or the one after that will probably be a channel update or a statement of such, and then later on in the month it will be a sort of a live stream, like Q&A sort of deal, as I've been mentioning. Other than that though, hopefully the normal schedule will continue as is. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.